Well, hello everybody and welcome to the latest event which is being held as part of DBF at Home. I'm Sue Wall and I have to say my guest today probably has the most unusual hobby we'll ever have at the Derby Book Festival, because my guest is Marion Dunn and she's going to be talking about her book, The Boxing Diaries. Hello, Marion.
Hello.
Now, I have to begin with the obvious why question. Why, as a woman aged 50, did you decide to take up boxing? It's a bit of an extreme midlife crisis, I think.
Well, I think people view it as extreme, but I'm going to try and dispel those myths really and just say what a sane choice, in fact, it was. I was in my late 40s, approaching 50. I had been quite fit in my 30s and 40s, mainly due to playing outdoor sports, but I'd got rather unfit. And I thought, really, I've just got to do something. It was actually quite a sense of desperation. At the time, I was working as a school laboratory technician in a northern English town, not earning a great deal of money, and putting on the pounds, but feeling that my body wasn't really as functional as it could be. So I googled cheap gyms in the area where I was working. I thought, well, I've just got to make an effort and give it a go. And to my amazement, there was a gym just round the corner from the school where I was working, which had some, sort of user-friendly times when it was open. And it seemed to be run out of a youth club. So I thought, well, perhaps they've got a weights room or something like that open to the public. So I booked in for a session, turned up, and found that it was a fully functioning old school boxing gym.
But why didn't you just, I mean, had that been me, I think I'd have taken one look and backed out.
But why? I mean, what have you got to lose, really? That's what I thought. I thought, I've got nothing to lose. I've been made to feel very, very friendly. People can see, to use that time-worn phrase, I was on a bit of a journey. And I felt
Right.
actually the only thing I really had to lose was my, pride. So I thought, well, that's not a bad thing to lose for the sake of getting fit. So that was how it all started, really.
And I think perhaps one thing we should make clear, when most people, when we refer to boxing, I think we immediately see a boxing ring and people fighting. But actually, a lot of yours is your book is much more about developing the skills and, as you say, the fitness. So tell us a bit more about those first few weeks when you were at the gym.
Right. Well, the first few weeks, I think the overriding sense I had was how welcome I was made to feel. It really was, a non-issue that I was female. I mean, I was the only female present at that time, but nobody made any special considerations or any kind of deal about that, which was great. I was just expected, like everybody else in the gym, to work very, very hard, and the training was extremely hard. The first 6 weeks in particular were very tough, but I absolutely gave it my all.
In what way was it tough, Marion? I mean, can you
Sorry, go on.
expand on that a bit?
Yeah, sure. I think basically, I think I was made to use a range of muscles I probably hadn't used for many decades. So a typical training session would involve 10 minutes of skipping at the start.
Okay, yeah, well, that's
Uh,
one for me already, yes.
but skipping, is a skill, and you have to develop the muscles to do it over many years. And, people come into the boxing gym expecting to be able to skip immediately, but you can't. So, it requires a degree of fortitude to build up those skills. So we typically skip for 10 minutes. Then we do something like 8 2.5 minute rounds on the boxing bags, which were ranged on stanchions along one side of the gym wall. then we'd normally do perhaps 6 1-minute rounds, including some work where the boxing coach holds up some pads that you strike. And then we would normally do some kind of circuit training. We had so that gives a picture of what we
and
were actually doing.
when you say 1-minute rounds, that's not actually a round in a ring against another boxer.
No, it's not. So to start with, you're not thrown into the ring willy-nilly, and I should stress that for anyone who's thinking of joining a boxing gym. Many people never go in the ring at all. I did, in fact, and found I really enjoyed it. But there's a deal of preparation that you need to do before doing that. So the more usual thing when you're building up fitness is to just basically hit a boxing bag that's hanging from a stanchion fixed into the wall. So that was what we would do routinely.
Okay, and this is what built up your fitness and probably put most people sitting in an exhausted heap in the corner.
Well, I did sit as an exhausted heap in the corner quite a lot. The training was very tough. There's no there's no kind of sugaring that pill. It was tough, but it made you feel absolutely fantastic, and the camaraderie between my fellow boxers was absolutely wonderful as well, which was massively helpful.
Now, there's one other little quirk to all of this, which I find very intriguing in the book, because you seem to have an alter ego who boxes, and she's called Marianne, if I'm right, because you put something in the book about how your name was mispronounced early on, and you just stuck with this different
Well, yeah,
name.
I mean, my boxing coach, my real name is Marion, but my boxing coach could never quite get that right, so he called me Marianne. But yeah, there was this alter ego. I think in nature I'm perhaps quite introverted, but I sort of became I was going to say another version of myself, but really it was myself, and that was the Marianne that eventually plucked up the courage to get in the boxing ring.
Yes, I mean, I think that was, having read the book and then thinking about it before the interview, I was almost thinking, is it through boxing you almost found maybe your inner self or your true self?
Yes,
who happens to be called Marianne.
I think there's a certain theatricality about the boxing that kind of appealed to me in a way which is quite hard to articulate. And I think there's a history of the performing arts to some extent in my family, which I felt had kind of bypassed me. But I feel that boxing is a kind of performance.
Yes, I certainly think many of us would see it as that. So why then do you write a book about it?
Well, that is an extremely good question, and one which I still have difficulty answering, really. One of the things that appealed to me, because I'm a bit of a nerd, is the technicality of the boxing. It was like learning to dance. I can't dance. So it was, for me, perhaps like trying to learn those sorts of skills. So I was very conscious of being best at it and learn, forget what I'd been taught. So and so many interesting and provoking things happened in the box gym. The people who inhabited the gym were such great companions that I sort of added in little stories, I guess, into my diary, which I wrote every couple of days. And then other thoughts came in, things about my family. And after a couple of years, I thought,
you very much interweave other stories. And I mean, it's called the Boxing Diaries, and it takes, I mean, it's over 4 years. So obviously events in your life do sort of intervene.
They do,
But
yes.
nevertheless, something led you then to, I mean, many people keep diaries, but maybe keep them privately. Why how did it come that you ended up sending it off to a publisher or deciding to, you know, go and see if you could get out to a wider audience?
Well, I felt that people had misconceptions about boxing, you know, certainly at the level that I was doing it, and they often conflated amateur boxing at the lowest level, which is really what I was doing and am still doing, with professional boxing. And I thought they were two very different worlds. And I wanted to convey the positive aspects of boxing to people. I felt I had an interesting story to tell, but I never really set out to write a book. And I think it's my sheer enthusiasm for boxing that sort of propelled me towards writing a book. And I almost wrote the book inadvertently, if that doesn't sound too foolish. It kind of wrote itself. It was a sort of the enthusiasm for it sort of spilling over. And, you know,
And
I
then
felt...
into the idea of getting it published, because again, as we know from many people at the book festival, a lot of people write, but to actually find an agent, get a publisher, get the book out there, that in itself can be a huge uphill task.
Well, again, I thought, well, I've written this sort of tome. I edited it as best I could myself, which probably wasn't very well. And then I thought, well, I've got this far with it. I might as well sort of throw it out there and send it to publishers. But of course, they won't. Many of them won't accept you without an agent. I didn't have an agent, so I sent it to publishers who would take essentially unsolicited manuscripts, not really expecting anything to happen. And then Sarah Hunt of Saraban Publishing rang me up and said, do you know what? I really like this book. I picked it up and I couldn't put it down. And it gave such a fresh insight into boxing and what it's like to do it as a slightly older woman. And the rest is history, really.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant. That's well, there's encouragement for other budding authors, but you've got there first with boxing, so we have to find some other. So let's go back to the boxing side, the sort of the boxing aspect of all of this. You're clearly fascinated by the technical side, the technique. And I think it is, again, you've started to tell us a little bit about the distinction you see between amateur boxing and the world of the professional boxer. So tell us more about the technique, and I think the word discipline crops up many times.
Well, yeah, I very much enjoyed learning the different techniques and the discipline. And because of the discipline routine, even though the rate of progression was quite slow, I could clearly see that progression. And that was something very tangible. It was very enjoyable as well. So I often say to people who haven't boxed that boxing is really just throwing your weight around in a
Yes.
good way, and training your body so that you really throw your weight around to throw out the punches. So when people talk about throwing a punch, that's actually what you're doing. You're effectively swinging your body around in a certain way so that your arms can throw out the punches. And so much of boxing is about footwork. And it frustrates me a little bit. I do watch professional boxing matches. I very much enjoy watching them from a technical point of view, although I'm very ambivalent about the injuries that people sustain that are sometimes very, very serious. But I always want to see the boxer's feet. Everything's in the feet. So reading their feet is like reading a book. But of course, they very rarely show that on the TV, which is quite frustrating to me. So much of it is about footwork.
You make it sound very much like, as I would see it, like tennis. I mean, in tennis, everybody keeps saying it's back to the footwork, and if your feet are in the right place, then you can hit the ball in the correct way. I mean, is there a similarity there that many of us, I think more people have played tennis than perhaps boxed?
A good friend of mine plays tennis, and he said to me, tennis is just like long range boxing, isn't it? And I think he summed it up absolutely perfectly. I think that it is. And I think in so many sports, I think there are, you know, parallels with perhaps dancing, ice skating, to a certain extent, gymnastics. Um, and I feel that there are, in fact, many parallels. I'm certainly not a natural mover or boxer. As a young person, I was never great at dancing or any of those things. But I feel with applying, you know, discipline and determination, I've actually been able to learn some of the basics of boxing quite successfully. And I now do throw a really, really good jab.
Yes, I gathered that, and I think maybe I'm glad I'm interviewing you at a distance and not close to, because clearly a jab from you can be very forceful. I
Can, but
think
only inside the boxing ring, not anywhere else.
I think I'm right in saying that you are still boxing, and so this is what, 7 years on now?
It is. I am still boxing and very much enjoying it. Although, you know, I have to say honestly, the difference between being nearly 57, which is what I am now, and 50, you know, you do have to make some adjustments. So probably when I was 50, I was training 3 times a week. Now it's twice, usually mixed in with another activity. And, you know, we are all, you know, fallible human machines and we have physical limits. And I think that's an important thing to say. And certainly, you know, if you are older and taking up a sport like boxing, which is quite intense, I think it's important to, you know, work up to it slowly and actually, truthfully, not expect too much of yourself, you know,
Yeah.
and rest.
That sounds a little bit like a health warning there, and some very good advice.
It's a note to self, really.
But what I did, and this is a quote I want that from your book. At one point, you say, "This is what boxing gives: fitness, self-belief, pride, discipline, a global surrogate family." And you also think it's relatively safe. So I can
I
see
do.
that you feel you get a lot of, I mean, that really impacts, I think, on the rest of your life from having taken up this skill.
Yes, for sure. I really do think that. And I think um, the discipline that I've learned, it kind of spills over into other areas of life, I think. I feel like I've actually been through some kind of military training, you know, even though it's non-military. I think there are a lot of parallels.
I mean, certainly you do read stories of essentially professional boxers who, of course, have a higher profile, who took up boxing perhaps as a way of being occupied, not getting into petty crime or something. I'm not, but so I was quite expecting you to have this sense of discipline from it, but you certainly find it's very, very fulfilling. And the point about developing self-esteem seems
Yes,
very strong.
I mean, it would be too strong to say, oh, you know, boxing's changed my life. And I think in modern times we have these terrible tropes of victimhood, where you know everyone has to be a victim to start with, and then they sort of morph into a Rocky Marciano. You know, it's it's not like that at all. But what I would say is, I do feel changed in a way by taking up boxing, and it's given a kind of um, inner confidence that's quite hard to explain. Somebody once said to me, if you can face an opponent in the boxing ring, you know, you can stare down almost any aspect of life. And I do feel that.
But at the same time, your word ambivalence, you certainly do see there's the side which many people are very critical of boxing, the violence, the potential injury and damage. So how do you kind of close that circle?
Well, the truth is, I can't close that circle. You know, I'm going to forever feel quite ambivalent about that. Um, you know, certainly the levels of training that people do to take part in professional boxing, you know, they're extremely strong, extremely fit, extremely powerful. And I think, the dynamic of professional boxers is a serious one where people, as I said, sustain very serious injuries. And I think at the higher level amateur boxing, similar things apply. I've said it before in other interviews, and I say again, being hit in the head is not a good idea under any circumstances. And, there is plenty of evidence to suggest that, scientific evidence. But I think if you box at an amateur level under the supervision of a trained coach, which I do, I think the levels of injury that you're likely to sustain are small, and I think that the benefits that you will gain are huge. But you take proper precautions. I've got some very good headgear that I wear, which actually contains some smart materials to protect my head. And I think the risk of injury at the level that I'm doing it comes more from actually somebody kind of making a mistake in the ring, rather than something that happens strictly during part of the boxing. Somebody moves in a certain way you're not expecting, and perhaps you hit them a bit harder than you'd intended. But in the amateur gym, the dynamic is very much to outwit your opponent, not to pulverize them, and that's seen as bad form in the amateur gym. It's about really outwitting them.
That certainly becomes very clear in your book. The control that whoever is managing the match, being the ref, and even when you're practicing and sparring in the gym, there seems to be a huge respect for the person who's acting as ref and saying stop.
Yes, quite. And I think one of the dangers can be actually once you get inside the ring, you can get quite single-minded, and it's always good to have somebody watching on, because you can kind of get carried away by the drama, and you think
you need somebody else to say stop.
I beg your pardon?
You need somebody else to say stop.
You do, because you can kind of think, right, I'm really going to get my jab through now. I'm going to get it through now. I'm going to walk forward and get my jab through, and you can get very determined. And that's not always a good thing. It is good in boxing to learn to hang back and wait, and rely on strategy and skill rather than constantly pushing yourself forward. And hanging back in boxing is actually a skill that you've got to learn. It's all about timing.
Again, that becomes apparent in the book. Marion, this has been absolutely fascinating. But our time is running out. Somebody else is going to be saying stop to us too.
Okie doke.
Before we go, what's the next book going to be? What are you going to take up at 60?
I think I'm being quite honest when I say, I'll never say never, but I think I'm probably a one-book wonder. I had an interesting story and have an interesting story to tell about boxing, which I think is quite original. And I really hope that I've inspired people, particularly older men and women who perhaps thought it wasn't for them, to take it up. And I can give a cast iron assurance that if you're prepared to work hard, you'll be made to feel welcome, very welcome, as I was, at any amateur boxing gym.
Brilliant. Well, we'll all start queuing up in Derby, but first of all, you need to read The Boxing Diaries by Marion Dunn with the subtitle, How I Got Hooked. I think it's been clear to us all, Marion, that you definitely are hooked on boxing. Many thanks.
Thank you.